Hi, I'm Jordan Morton. I'm a Boucher grad. I'm practicing over in Victoria, BC. Awesome. It's obviously BC. Good to see everybody today. Before I introduce our next speaker, I don't think we have any housekeeping items. But today, if you do learn anything from Cam, please take a minute or two and hop on video at the back there. And what do you want? Just kind of.
They've got a couple quick questions.
They'll have a couple quick questions for you. So if you learn anything cool and you want to share, that'd be great. So our next speaker, he is a doctor of optometry who was raised in Victoria and then graduated from optometry at Waterloo. He's a fellow of the College of Optometrists, a previous director on the optometry board, and has a special interest in vision therapy and rehabilitation. Please join me with a warm welcome for Dr. Cameron McCorden.
Thank you. Is the lapel? Perfect, lapel mic's running. Thank you everybody for coming in today. And I went lapel mic because I actually enjoy being able to walk around and talk to you a little bit more and not just be hidden behind the podium for things. So let's open it up with why. Well, why am I here? Well, naturopaths are amazing. I co-manage with lots of naturopaths and I send lots of patients to naturopaths, and I've been helped many, many, many times. So, I kind of often refer to the naturopaths that I know, like my amazing functional medicine doctors who, actually take the time to figure out what's going on and why. So that's one of the reasons why I'm excited to be here. But for you, a little bit of show of hands, and some of you might end up exercising your shoulders here, but how many of you have had a concussion or know somebody who has? And actually for these questions, or treat people with, how about headaches and migraines? Dizziness and disequilibrium? Reading abilities. Anybody have someone in their family who struggles with reading or focus and attention? All right? Don't worry, it's only one slide. Motor coordination is another. And how many of you have parents over the age of 70? All right? There we go, right? So as we go through today, yeah, fair enough. Now, as we go through today, basically all of these things are going to pertain to either yourself, your practice, or the people you love and care about. And that is my goal, and we'll talk about that a little bit. So a little bit about me. I don't know how many of you have seen this before, but it is one of my favorite cartoons, especially for your type A patients who kind of need to slow down a little bit. You know, the ones where you're like, hey, why don't we try some mindfulness and meditation? And they're like, I'm going to meditate so hard. So a little bit, for me, background-wise, I moved from engineering to optometry. I spent my entire life wanting to be an engineer. I wanted to invent things that would help people, and I like solving problems and then seeing solutions implemented and feeling like I'm making a difference. However, I left engineering because most of my friends wound up going up to work in Fort Mac, and I thought I was going to get stuck behind a computer in Fort Mac. So I went to optometry so I could work more with people. Now, I'm a natural skeptic of most things. The engineer brain in me wants to know how things work and why things work and needs to think about things linearly that way. And my mission is to change how we understand vision and its role in our lives and those we care about. But today's goals, I want to redefine vision for you and introduce you to the model of vision that really is more functional and applicable. We want to understand what areas your vision impacts for both you, your families, and your patients. I want to give you a few tools when you're looking at literature on this stuff and evaluating it. We want to learn how to spot some of these conditions. And then I want to make sure I've left some time at the end for some questions, because I find that's often one of the most fun parts about talking. Disclaimer, because I always have to throw this in, my only conflict of interest here, I don't have any products to sell you, is that this is what I do for work, and I love my work. So that is my disclaimer. There's a few presuppositions that are important to talk about before we dig in. One of them that I commonly explain to patients is a difference in the mindset of approach. All good, my friend. I'm happy you're here. One of them is the different mindset and approach between thinking like an engineer versus classical thinking sometimes within the course of medicine. An example of this is how we're taught in school as far as clinicians goes is do the tests, make a diagnosis, turn to the book, do what the treatment says for diagnosis, and that's how we look at things. The engineering brain in me goes, what problems are you having? What systems might be involved in those problems? Let's see if the systems work the way that they're supposed to or not. Any system that's not working properly, why don't we see if we can find a way to make that work better if that's what's playing into the symptomatology and what's going on there. Treating vision, when we treat it, is not about symptoms for that same reason. You know, just because somebody has headaches doesn't mean that treating their vision is going to help unless their vision is part of their headaches. So again, there's that linear logical side of me. It's the objective testing that tells you what's there. It's kind of like treating chronic fatigue with iron. You know, it's only going to be helpful if they've got a deficit in iron, and that's part of the fatigue issue. You don't just throw iron at anybody who's tired. Now, the human visual system. This is another important piece, and we were talking about it this morning. How long do most of you think people have been literate for? Like the majority of the population. How long do you think the majority of the population has been reading? And I don't just mean the select few, I mean like the majority of humans. Not that long. A couple hundred years at most? Are most people like literate? So the human visual system hasn't evolved, and if you look at our course of our history, the human visual system has not evolved for the demands of our modern life. This is both eye movements when reading, this is extended computer screen time, and this is sustained focus at near. So let's redefine vision and what we mean when we think of vision, because most of you probably think of the eye chart at the end of the room. All right? Now, for anybody who takes the time to read this and remembers those links that you used to get sent that was something promising, and then it was really just Rick Astley singing his song. I think we were the first people to rickroll TEDx, probably the only people to rickroll TEDx with the same thing. So vision. Vision's about how your eyes and brain work together. And this is the funny little thing I like to draw. So that nerdy engineer side of me goes, basically what's coming in your eyes is a bunch of ones and zeros. Your brain has the formulas to decode that information and then basically make meaning out of it. And by meaning, it's not just what you see. Where are things in relation to you? How far away is the person in front of you? How far away is your computer? Where is the thing you want to grab, etc.? Your position in relation to other things. So it's all about basically decoding that and using that information, and sometimes that's accurate and sometimes it's not. Now, there's still a very pervasive old model of vision, which is really kind of about anatomy. It's very anatomical, and it's about whether you can see clearly or not. So, you know, it's kind of like, if you can see clearly and your eyes are physically healthy, you're fine. So it's about clarity, it's about acuity, and it's about eye health, heavily anatomical. The functional model is much more about how do we process our vision, and then how do we use that information in integration with our other systems, like our vestibular system. If you have a mismatch between your eyes and inner ear, and we'll cause that for someone in here today, but if you have a mismatch between the two, you will feel seasick. That's actually what seasickness is. Your vision's telling you one thing, your vestibular system's telling you something else, and so we've got a sensory mismatch there. The functional model also takes into account motor control. How accurately do we control what our eyes do as well? And then there's pieces around attention and how that information is integrated, so it's all on top of things. But back to redefining vision, it's more than just clarity. And to think of it this way too, there's two systems that kind of play an important role in this. And they're actually like distinct separate visual systems with distinct separate pathways. We have our central system and our peripheral system. The central is what's clear and what you kind of focus on. And your peripheral system is more about motion, movement, balance, and other things. And it's about 95% plus of our retina that's actually involved in our peripheral vision. And most people don't realize how important it truly is. So our central system, again, is really about seeing clearly, high contrast, high detail. That's why you look in those places. And you move your eyes to basically put the image on your macula or that central part of your eye. But the peripheral system, and this is really the one that's way more interesting, is about spatial perception. It's about balance. It's about motion and movement. Okay, how many of you in here have gotten glasses before that make you feel wonky or like you don't like wearing them? Great. This is because it messes with your, so even though your optometrist is going to be like, no, you can see clearly in these, this is the right prescription. If that prescription messes with your peripheral perception of space, then it will make you feel like, you know, not quite natural and not quite right, because your brain will be misperceiving space and motion. It's actually a very, very common issue with progressive lenses, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, because that definitely pertains to not only many people in this room, but it's also is a significant cause of falls in the older population as well. But our peripheral is low detail and low contrast. Now, I'm going to simplify things a little bit for us and kind of talk about the 4 pillars of how our vision works. And then after this background info, we'll get into things that are a little bit more practical for you too. But we have things like eye tracking. How well do the eyes move and track? Okay, something most of us take for granted. You're sitting there, you're reading through stuff on your computer, on your phone, maybe texting right now, whatever, but you're actually using your eye tracking to do that and you don't really think about it. But how accurately do they track? How well do the eyes work together? Do the eyes actually align the way that they're supposed to all the time, or is it a fight to keep them aligned properly also? Now, I'm going to start passing something around out here in the audience, and these two things, and I will need one of them back at some point. Well, actually, I'll need both of them back by the end. But these two things can actually mimic an issue where your eyes are straining to work together. All right, so here, I'll pass one this way. But the two things I want you to do is if you have your computer in front of you, hold it in front of your eyes and just read and see what your reading feels like. The second one is if you actually, you don't have to put it all the way on too, you can just hold it in front. You won't like it enough to keep it on. But if you hold it there, now the question then goes, okay, how does it feel to be focusing and paying attention right now? And the next question would be, how long until you feel like this gives you a headache?
Well, I don't have a headache yet.
Does it feel straining?
It's just very blurry.
Cool. So that means usually we've got to crank it up a little for her too.
Do you have contacts in?
There we go.
Okay.
Cool. So we'll pass those around, have a look through it, and really most importantly is like when you actually go to read or look up close. Some of you might have double vision at first, and the first thing to do then would be to take your finger, try to focus on that, because the proprioceptive localization of your finger will actually help you converge your eyes. Because the goal is you want to make the target single with that and literally just feel the strain that it takes to maintain it. We have the focusing mechanism in our eye as well, which kind of acts like the autofocus on a camera. That's what many of you have lost. And past about the age of 35, we all start to lose that too. And then we have our visual processing and integration, which is actually one of the most important and influential parts of how our vision works. When we talk about that visual processing and integration, that peripheral awareness, and then there's different levels of depth perception, and we'll talk about this with testing too. How many of you have been to the eye doctor and you do the depth perception test where you have to see if the fly's popping out or if the rings are popping out, right? Okay. Do you want to know how much that carries over to real life depth perception? Not all that much, okay? And it's because there's different types of depth perception. So being able to tell which thing is closer to you on the book does not necessarily mean that you're going to be able to tell where is the baseball before it hits you in the face, okay? It also doesn't mean that you can tell how far away things are from you. All it means is that you can judge the difference between those two things. So there's different types of depth perception as well. But tracking. This is one of the ones I like to break down because many people with a background in kinesiology, physiotherapy, etc., when we think of tracking, we're like, okay, a motor movement, a saccade, an eye movement. But what a lot of people don't realize is that for the eyes to accurately track, it's a lot more than just a movement. Before you make the movement, you've got to plan the movement. So we need to accurately be able to judge where things are before we make the movement. Okay, so if you're going to move your eyes somewhere, first your brain's got to figure out where is it that they're going to go and make a calculation about how it's going to send them there. And then it also involves how well the eyes work together. Because if your eyes don't work together that well, then you might move them, but they both end up in slightly different places when you've done that. So think of the act of reading, for example. When you're reading, and this is something a lot of people don't realize, but when you're reading and you're looking at a word, you're actually looking about 1/3 of the way through the word or a small group of words depending, and you're seeing the word at once. And then your brain actually then calculates how far away is the next word for where I need to move my eyes to. And then it creates the motor responses to move the eyes there. Your focusing mechanism needs to actually be working properly, so it basically keeps your focus in the right plane as you do that as well. And then if your eyes are making small errors in those movements, your brain's constantly readjusting them as they go. So for example, when I was in university, I could study for about 3 pages at a time before I'd read a page and go, I just read that, okay? And then I'd go make myself a tea, grab some food, come back, sit and try to study again, all right? I was generally the first person out of every single test that I wrote, and I never read a test twice, never looked through one. It was like I had a finite amount of time that I could spend doing that, and I just needed to be out of there at the end. After treating my own visual issues, my fellowship exam was the first time where I actually comfortably sat, did a test, and then I went back through the test to actually double check all my questions, because what happened was when I was reading, my eyes weren't making tons of recorrective movements all the time, so my eye movement was much more efficient. It's like if you have a better running gait, you can run for longer with less effort and less energy. An example of eye tracking while reading. This one's kind of fun to see, so we'll get the video playing. Now there's 2 readers here. Reader on the left, reader on the right. Can you tell which reader is having a heck of a time in grade 6? Okay, skips lines, loses her place, and this is actually a playback of real eye recording. All right, and the young girl this was a recording of, her story is actually in our book. You can download a free copy on our website. We'll make that stuff available afterwards. But when she reads, her eyes actually don't go to the right place at all, but she thinks they are. So it's kind of like listening to an audio CD or somebody talking if the words were all jumbled. Because according to her, she thinks her eyes are moving properly, but this is the order that she's getting the information in. Then we can look at things like how the eyes work together. So when we talk about the act of reading and eye movement, and this pertains to really any human who wants to read, we look at things like, do the eyes work together? So on this recording here, you can see we've got the left eye and the right eye. All right, so it's kind of like if you take your car in for a wheel alignment, you'd like to see that the two wheels point in the same direction as you need them to. All right? Here, you can see a reader seriously struggling because the two eyes do not do the same things while she's trying to read. So when she reads, not only do her eyes jump somewhere where she doesn't want them to go, each eye lands in a different place. So that's a young reader where you can teach them a word on one line. 3 lines later, they won't recognize the same word they just learned because to them it looks like something totally different because their eyes have literally jumbled through it. Okay? It's surprisingly common. And then there's all sorts of variations between us. You'll see a number of adults too, and kids, where the eyes have some minor issues with what they do together. And then it can just make reading more fatiguing and not as nice to do. You know, kind of like driving a 1970s van down the highway where you're constantly fighting just to keep it straight. The drive is not as nice. So from the reading and learning side, eye movement ability can have a significant impact on reading and learning, both of children and for yourselves. And 80% of struggling readers have a problem with eye movement issues that go undetected on regular testing. Okay, I was one, my sister was one. You know, I actually still remember saying to my sister, why don't you just try harder? Like, what's wrong with you? You're smart. School should be easier. And this was something that wasn't picked up. So vergence issues as well, problems with how the eyes work together. And what I'd ask when you look through these goggles, and I can give a couple other demos after, is how long do you want to pay attention like that for? Okay, because issues with vision can cause 7 of the 9 symptoms of attention deficit. Now, I'm not so naive to think that every issue with attention deficit is a vision problem. Of course it isn't. But issues with vision can be part of it. And they're easy to rule out or rule in if they're tested for properly. And so that's where actually with those goggles as they go around, again, sit, try to focus, even on me. Because again, as humans, we place our vision where we want to place our attention. So one of my patients just this week who struggles a lot with attention, when she looks at people, she has a hard time maintaining eye contact because the background kind of moves and is sort of distracting for her. And she says when she looks at people, it feels like her eyes want to jump away from looking at them. And it's harder for her to sustain her attention on it. Again, our vision leads our attention. Most of you paying attention to me right now are looking at me because that's how we do it. We even talk about it with our kids. It's like, look at me, pay attention. And the interesting part was actually when we stabilized what her eyes did that day, she could sit there and look, and she said, it doesn't feel like the background's trying to pull my eyes away from what I'm looking at anymore. Now, the interesting part there, statistically, probably about 15% of you in the room experience something similar or know somebody who does. It's also, there's a higher prevalency of those issues in the neurodiverse population as well. So whether we're talking autism spectrum disorder or similar. Oh, this is kind of a fun one. So what I do for parents in the room sometimes so that they can understand about reading fluency is if you have somebody read, but you block out the word ahead of what they're just saying. Okay, and this is kind of a fun one to do and to practice. So you have them read out loud, but they can't see what the next word is or what the rest of the sentence is. Okay, and I tried to make a little bit of a digital demo for this, for sharing online. And so all of you can kind of follow along with this. And what I want you to do here is read these words out loud as they appear on the screen. But read the words out loud as they appear on the screen, okay? Everyone ready for that? Yeah? Okay, I trust like there'll be like 4 of you who actually do it. Ready? Go. All right, so I was also kind of cruel there because I used a bunch of words where the pronunciation of the word depends on the context of the rest of the sentence, okay? But what that shows us is when kids have to read out loud in class or read out loud to parents, one of the skills of good oration is being able to scan ahead of what you're reading so that what you're saying is pronounced in the proper way with the correct intonation and everything else. I forget what movie that was where he's like, you put the incorrect emphasis on the wrong syllable. But that's a huge skill for reading. And that's where reading fluency can be affected by these things. And I share this with you in case you have kids who reading fluency is noted as a problem when they're reading out loud. And it's often an eye tracking thing. Now, the same thing actually plays into music as well. You know, you want to watch out for kids who have musical talent but struggle with sight reading music. These are often the ones who develop the ability to be very good at memorizing, and they can play your stuff from the beginning, but they struggle if you start them in the middle of a piece because they can't actually sight read it. They know it only by memory. And unfortunately, a lot of them fall out of their musical trajectory because they struggle with sight reading and with theory and stuff because of that. And there was a beautiful one a mom just shared with me the other week where her daughter said to her, "Mom, I didn't know that there was sharps and flats on the notes before." And she passed every eye exam because she could see stuff, but because of what her eyes did, it basically made it difficult for her and she confused some of the information on the page. Visual motor and writing. This is one I had no idea about earlier on. Oh, maybe we can do a little bit of a demo on visual motor stuff. This one's kind of fun. Prism goggles. Who's got the Prism goggles right now? Can we pass them back up? I'll come grab them. Awesome. Now, do you want to be a volunteer too at the same time? Yeah, come on up. Are you? No reading. Are you an athlete?
Yeah.
Perfect. What sports?
Long time ago.
Okay. What's your name?
Brent.
I'm Cam.
Hey, Cam.
Nice to meet you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we're going to torture him just a little bit. Everybody give him a short round of applause for coming up. It was kind of cruel because I just asked who had the goggles and then told him to take part. Okay, so just quickly here, grab the beanbag.
Great.
We're going to have you back up a little bit there. And then we actually need a decent target for you too. And actually, why don't we, can everybody over there see? Yeah, let's do this here. So come maybe a couple steps, that's perfect. Now, can you hit the chair with a beanbag, just underhand or over? Great, awesome. Now, so he had to judge where is the chair and then make the motor response to put the beanbag on the chair. Now we're gonna have some fun with you.
Oh, no.
Cool. Here's your beanbag. Okay, turn around, twice. Great, put the beanbag on the chair.
Oh, no.
Okay? Where'd you throw the beanbag?
Why didn't I try harder?
Okay, close your eyes. There we go. Perfect, open. All right, now on the chair.
Okay, this makes no sense.
There we go. Beautiful. Round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much. So what happened there is all we did was we changed where he thought the chair was. Okay? Now, there's actually a lot of people walking around who have visual systems who work like that. Okay? The amount of times you get a parent in tears because you throw a beanbag to their kid and it like hits them, and then you put something on them that helps their depth perception, and then all of a sudden their kid catches it and it's like they literally can't believe it. Because you're only as accurate with your motor responses as you are visually figuring things out and then guiding that as well. Now, I never really understood how this played into writing until earlier in my career, but here's a grade 4 really struggling in school, and if you actually look closely at this, what you'll notice is that he actually misses a lot of the words when he copies it down. So the instructions they're given is, okay, I'm going to have you copy this down from here to here, and we're going to take about a minute to do it. Just because we don't want to have to take too much time. Some kids would take a lot more. You don't have to do the whole thing, but do what you can in a minute. That's the same kid. Okay, now if somebody had shown that to me earlier in my career, I would have scoffed at them until I actually watched it. But it's the same principle of the visual motor ability, because the visual motor side of things, again, only as accurate as what our brain can calculate. I've watched the same thing with my niece. For attention and focus, this was a cool little study. Generally, the basis of the study is if a kid has problems with how their eyes work together, then treating that issue lowers their scores on the attention deficit testing. Okay? Now, mind you, again, back to that logic piece, if somebody has attention deficit and they don't have any problems with how their eyes work together, treating it's not going to do anything because there's no problem to treat. And that's sometimes where, and we'll go through it a little bit, that's where the literature can kind of get confusing depending on how you pick who you're treating and how those things happen as well. And again, I like to use that iron example for that. Also, attention focus, you guys are already trying to focus through those things. Here's the other big one, post-concussion stuff. It's like 90% of symptomatic patients after that acute phase of concussion were found to have ocular motor binocular issues. Now, on a side note on that too, though, a lot of visual issues with concussion really improve on their own during the acute phase. It's usually the stuff we're worried about longer term is what's there after the acute part of concussion. But it's very, very prevalent. And it can actually manifest like other issues. Okay, so everybody, I want you to meet Dan. 2 years after concussion. He's been through pretty much every therapy you can. If anybody remembers, some of the big 3-letter conglomerates who did all the rehab for quite a while, he's been through vestibular rehab, he's been through kines, he's been through everything. Now, what would most of you think when you watch him walking and tandem walk and balance there? Right? Vestibular problem. That's usually, right? Like you look at it and you go, all right, he's got balance, he's got a vestibular issue. Now, he'd had all the vestibular treatment in the world, and the problem was people thought he was faking it because it's like, well, your vestibular treatment's not working the way it's supposed to. So obviously you're faking it. Now, what happened here with Dan, what you can watch is we actually figured out he had a depth perception issue. So we changed his depth perception that day, and his vision was no longer in the way of him balancing. Okay? Now here's the fun part. All right, we need another volunteer. Somebody who's not a gymnast or a yogi. Do you have like lots of yoga? Or, are you? Okay, this may still work. Come on up. Let's try. We'll see what's actually in your coffee mug. Sorry, I'm Cam. Sahar, really nice to meet you. So what I'd love you to do is actually just give us a little tandem walk, like heel to toe. Perfect, good. And go backwards. Awesome, right? Okay, so we know your drink's clean. Slip those on for me. Now what I want you to do is the same thing, okay? And watch my finger here while you go.
Watch your finger.
Yeah, just watch my finger. Cool. Heel to toe. Make sure your heel touches your toe. There you go. Now go forwards like that. Yep. Go backwards. Can you feel the difference? Can everybody see the difference? All right, cool. You can pop those off too. Awesome, thank you very much. So how did that feel? How would you explain that?
My perception of where my foot was landing
Yeah.
was off, and then having to focus on you
Yeah.
and not being able to be straight
Yeah.
was a challenge.
And how did your balance feel?
My little heel could not handle stepping down.
Yeah, cool. Okay, thank you. So what we did there is we actually made it so that her depth perception was actually messing with the integration between the visual and vestibular systems. And vision is 70% of what's coming into our brain sensory-wise. So that's a big proportion of her senses that were actually messed up. So that's a common thing after concussion. Now, the visual things to look out for after concussion, and again, please remember, some of these have overlap with other things too. It's not always just all vision. It's like any other profession. It's not always just the one thing. But screen and light sensitivity, incredibly common sequelae of binocular problems after concussion. Same with difficulty in reading. Headaches and migraines, okay? And I'm happy to send this to you guys after, but I'll teach you a really great little screening tool for that. And we're actually involved in some research right now with EEG data showing the difference in how vision's processed in the relationship to headaches and migraines. Nausea is a common one. Here, what I do is actually pass these back around, and feel free to, even at some point, have a good look around with that. And it'll affect you more if you stand up. What I'd say is just maybe try that if you're in the back. But nausea is a common issue with vision. Dizziness, disequilibrium, difficulty in busy visual environments. When there's lots of visual stimulus and people have a harder time processing it, it'll trigger fight or flight way more. A big part of that sometimes is depth perception too. So for example, if you take somebody and you make quick hand movements in front of their face and they kind of flinch with it, it's usually because their brain can't tell whether the hand's going to hit them or not. So it responds to it like it is going to hit them. And you can watch those changes almost immediately depending on how someone's depth perception is working. Symptoms from driving, and that often gets it's kind of messed up. Somebody's like, oh, I can't drive. I get overwhelmed. I get anxious. Maybe it's just PTSD because I had my accident. And then we actually look, and when they're trying to drive, their eyes don't work well together. Their eyes can't focus properly. It takes them longer to focus on different cars and moving objects. They can't tell how fast other vehicles are going the same way that they used to. And so their brain is like yes, it is a much more stressful task. And it's kind of funny, because one of the things in the office is that sometimes when you see somebody with bad depth perception, and it doesn't work as well as it should, and they're part of a couple, all right, it's almost always easy to tell who's going to be the nervous passenger in the car. You're too close to the car in front of us. You cut that too tight. You didn't have enough time, like white knuckle passenger, because to the passenger, yeah, they are too close. Yeah, they don't have enough time. It is scary for them. But to the driver, they're like, what are you talking about? Like, I had lots of time. I'm not too close. I'm not too whatever. Or it's sometimes also the person who takes forever to turn left on the highway. But here's the thing. They actually can't tell how much time they have for the car that's coming at them. Because that actually takes a lot of depth processing to actually be able to tell how much time do you have to make a turn when a vehicle is traveling at, towards you at 100 kilometers an hour. So these things play into vestibular disorders too. Patients or family members with vestibular neuritis, Meniere's, even sometimes after BPPV, if there's damage to the vestibular system or things don't work well, the brain has to reintegrate vision in the vestibular system afterwards. And minor vision problems can actually become way more major. So somebody might have a slight depth issue, but then if they also have problems with the vestibular system after, their brain actually needs to be able to become more reliant on their vision to help make up for the poor vestibular function, and small issues with their vision will then become bigger problems for them because of that. And a lot of visual vestibular mismatch symptoms can mimic chronic vestibular problems too. So again, if you kind of stand up with one of those on, you'll sort of get the piece. If it's causing double vision, then I probably have to re-rotate it as well. Headaches and migraines, this is a really big one, especially with the amount of computer screen time, device time, and everything like that going on these days too. This one's huge. Vision is often one of the triggers, but there's a really easy way to tell. And again, we've got some cool stuff with EEGs that I'll show you. So the easy screening tool for vision, and I can send this out afterwards as well, is just simply, it looks like this. This is what we use. It's a bunch of black and white lines, and it's usually best shown on a phone screen because it's usually more offensive that way. All right? And generally what you ask people is you go, hey, does this feel like it'll cause you a headache or migraine or provoke dizziness? And what's really funny is the range of reactions in people, because a lot of people are like, well, doesn't everyone hate that? And it's like, well, no, if their vision actually works properly, this is just a bunch of black and white lines, and it's like, meh. All right? But then you'll get people where you show it to them and they like literally want to hit your phone out of your hand. And I've just about had that happen. But what this shows us is that you're putting sensory information in visually, and the brain's not handling it well, and we're getting an increase in symptoms. It's like if you had a patient come in going, hey, I get all these hives and anaphylactic reactions, I don't know if it's peanuts or not, and you give them a peanut and they break out. You're like, okay, well, we can be relatively certain that peanuts are part of your problem. It's the same thing with this and headaches, dizziness, and migraines. And when you do use an EEG, and you use those black and white lines and you show them to somebody, and you watch the response of the brain, when you change how they process their vision, you get a different response on the EEG that actually correlates to the person's subjective change. So, we put a lens in front of somebody that they then look at that and go, oh, that actually doesn't really bother me now. The EEG will also show the change at the same time. Or from the therapy side, sometimes you can retrain how the brain's controlling the eyes, because that's generally an indicator of some binocular dysfunction. It's just called pattern glare. There was an optometrist who kind of made it famous named Bowen Rd. I can also email that out afterwards. My email will be up at the end of the slideshow, and I'm happy to reply to anyone with that also, so you have it. But it is hands down, the only limitation of it is if someone doesn't like it, it doesn't mean that they don't have a vision problem. But it is a very, very specific screener for those things where if someone has headaches, migraines, screen sensitivity, dizziness, and that provokes symptoms, then we know their vision is part of the problem. And also very treatable at the same time. Cognitive and reading performance. There's also areas in here where you can sometimes enhance things. So one of my friends got glasses that actually changed how his eyes move when he's on the computer so they're more stable. And his response was, after 6 hours of computer work, now I feel like I did when I sat down, as opposed to this like heavy-headed kind of foggy feeling, even though he could see it. So from a cognitive and reading performance side, there's things that can be done to help with that too. Now, what I am kind of curious about here is, and let's see if there's anyone in the front couple rows where this is the case. Does this like heavily offend any of you?
It's bothersome.
Yeah? Do you wear glasses or contacts?
Yeah.
You wear contacts, right?
Yeah.
Yeah?
I don't want to do anymore.
Okay, sweet. Okay, see, there's a perfect response. And how do you feel about it?
Fine.
Yeah, like meh. Okay. Yeah, that's thank you, you two. I'm so glad you sat together. Okay, and like both of your contact lenses, like they're clear for the distance when you look far away?
Yeah, fairly clear.
Okay, awesome. Let's try to see if we can do something kind of fun with you. Yeah. Okay, let's check this out. Just watch my finger for a second. Is my finger clear?
I think so.
Okay, good. Watch it. Just move there. Okay, stay focused on it. And stay focused. Good. Thanks for letting us put you on the spot a little bit. All right. Now we're going to have some fun with this too. And we'll see. I don't know. Hopefully I picked right. Now, if I can make all this work. If I do this, does that change it?
Yeah, now it's fine.
Okay.
No, yeah, that's
Different?
not great, and that I don't mind looking at.
Easier.
Yeah.
Cool. Could you pull up something on your computer for her to read?
Yeah.
Yeah, just pull up something text heavy. Like a book.
Like a book.
Yeah, like a book or a website with a ton of text. Because I just want to show you something kind of fun about that, okay? Thank you for being a good sport too. Sorry, I'm Cam. Tara, nice to meet you. It's funny, I feel like we almost need a disclaimer at the beginning of things where it's like, you may just get picked, you know. So sometimes ask for volunteers, otherwise just pick people out. So we'll continue on, and then once we have that, we'll come back and show you.
How does this look?
Let's see.
I just.
Let's go smaller. Yeah, like something, you know, like a text document, a contract, a email, a history form, whatever your college makes you read. College documents, perfect. Read your practice guidelines and bylaws. But you know those by heart, right? Yeah? Okay, sweet. So here. Great. Yeah, that's great. So here, put that on your lap. Hold it, and actually hold it up a little bit so it's a little close. There we go. Now read in your head for a second. Feel how your eyes move.
I feel like I can read quicker.
Yeah, kind of cool, hey?
Yeah.
Did you guys hear that? Okay, so explain in a slightly louder voice. What does it feel like? There's two different, the first one is, do you notice a difference in movement?
For sure, a difference in movement. Yeah. I feel like now that you put that on, I go back a little bit in reading, and when you put that on, I can just move very smoothly through it.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah.
Now the next thing I want you to pay attention to is what's it like to understand and comprehend what you're reading. Okay?
Yeah.
Keep going.
Yeah, I think it's easier to comprehend it.
So thank you for your kindness and sharing too. I'm being a little vulnerable with that. One of the young women I was working with the other week, what she said is, and she expressed it very eloquently, she said, it feels like the words are going in my brain when I read as opposed to just kind of like by it, okay? And essentially what that did for her was that meant that her brain had to put less cognitive energy into her eye movements and just trying to do that so it could focus on the actual what was there, okay? So it's kind of like, any other task, if you really want to listen to something or pay attention, you don't do something else that's complex and requires focus. But if your eye movements require too much cognitive energy and work, it's actually harder to retain what you're reading. And that was one of the issues that I ran into in school as well, usually after a couple of pages. I just changed how our eyes tracked and worked together. Simple witchcraft. No, there's like, basically, we made it so that her judgment of where the next word was different, her judgment of where the thing was different, and it stabilized her focusing mechanism and what her eyes do together. And I used some lenses for that. And after like 10 plus years of doing this, you get pretty good at guesstimating what's probably going to be helpful for somebody in any given scenario. And it's not perfect, but you can usually show something.
So does that mean if she wore those glasses that she would have that effect?
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And the funny thing that sometimes, and this is a bit of another conversation to get into, you know, is oftentimes earlier on, and especially in kind of the community that works with functional vision issues and vision therapy, there's a lot of people where they're like, you know, well, glasses and lenses aren't natural. We want to get the eyes to do everything on their own without glasses and lenses. And what kind of struck me a few years back was like, okay, well, wait a second, screens and computers aren't natural either. You know, we also know walking on concrete's not natural. You know, so we wear shoes to walk on concrete and run on concrete. You know, and yes, we do want to try to help avoid people from needing glasses for distance, and there are ways to do that. But you know, using glasses for reading and near work isn't necessarily going to make things worse or people more dependent on it. Now, that actually ties into our next subject perfectly, because sometimes a lot of people are like, well, hey, I started using reading glasses and then my eyes got worse over time. Okay? Most of the people who say that also had their hair go gray or fall out and get more wrinkles over the same amount of time, and the glasses didn't cause that. So what we're talking about is what's called presbyopia, which is the age-related change to the eye. And somewhere in the, oh, weird, we lost some stuff. But with presbyopia, within there, what happens is that lens in your eye loses its elasticity, and it's not able to change shape as well, and then you're not able to shift your focus quite as well as you could beforehand too, and that degrades basically between the ages of 35 and 50, 60, and it'll affect people slightly differently based on what their kind of general prescription and other eye issues are. But it is commonly sometimes why people are like, oh no, you know, these made my eyes worse. Or you'll get people who are resistant to glasses because they think it's a sign of getting older. And sometimes a funny one, I sit in the exam room and generally speaking, you know, it's sometimes somebody sitting there being like, well, I don't want to have to wear glasses now. That makes me feel like I'm getting old. And I'm sitting there being like, what do you call me old? Come on. But again, mostly it's due to our environment too. But so kind of our function summary for you guys, vision is a complex process that goes way beyond seeing clearly. It can play a role in many, many conditions. And let's dig into a little bit of the literature about it. Now, I was originally trained that the work I do now is complete quackery. That is what I came out of school believing from the professors who taught me, and I understand why they think that way too. And a lot of it comes down to syntax, but there is no shortage of arguing in the literature. But I am a skeptic of everything, including arguments and literature, okay? And there's a couple of problems that can come up in the literature in different areas. For example, if you take a whole bunch of kids struggling with reading and you give them treatment designed to improve their eye tracking abilities, well, guess what? That's not going to do anything for the kids where eye tracking is not a problem. So if you don't select your population properly for treatment, of course you're not going to see any results for things. So there's a huge issue there. There's also problems with syntax. And what I mean by syntax is, you know, for example, people have arguments over dyslexia. And the reason being is that in the specific diagnosis of dyslexia, it actually says that before you make the diagnosis, you're supposed to rule out all sensory, motor, neurological, visual, and whatever else components before you make the diagnosis. Now, realistically, most of the people diagnosed with dyslexia have never actually had all those ruled out. So you end up with several different populations. So you could take the argument side of going, well, yes, if it's a true diagnosis, then it's been ruled out. So of course it can't be visual because the definition of the diagnosis says that it can't be. But in reality, a lot of people with dyslexia also have eye tracking issues and stuff on top of it, or mimicking it, or sometimes not involved. Okay, one of my really good friends is severely dyslexic, and I was so excited. I was like, oh my goodness, man, let's test your eyes. Let's see if something's going on, and let's see if we can help you. There's absolutely nothing visual going on. I'm like, sorry, not visual. But if you think about it, the parts of the brain involved in dyslexia have to get the information through that visual highway in the first place. So there actually are a lot of kids and a lot of people where the information's just not even getting there in the first place. And sometimes a key indicator of that is, do people perform better when they can hear things versus when they have to read them? All right, same brain, just different avenue that the information's going in. Now, within the controversy, a big thing of this is competing models of vision. We talked a little bit about that. And that also happens after concussion. And sometimes it's the fault of our own profession too, because it's like, okay, we're going to treat concussion by treating vision. Okay, well, that only matters if there's vision problems as a result of the concussion. You know, it's like treating headaches and light sensitivity or fogginess. Yeah, that can be effective if there's visual issues that are at the root cause of that, but not just treating the symptoms themselves. And I'm sure that's very similar to a lot of the naturopathy world as well. And then in the definitions, there's more stuff too. So the way that I was taught in school, treating visual issues and sometimes using specific exercises or activities was really taught about improving muscles. Okay? Now, if you have a child who's learning how to play piano, right, you're not necessarily improving their muscles. You're improving how they process the music, their ability to make sense of the musical information, and their ability to coordinate the responses based on that information. So really, effective treatment of vision isn't about strengthening muscles or changing anatomy. It's about actually creating feedback mechanisms that give that brain the opportunity to learn how to do that process more accurately. And that's what that piece is about. So if you take somebody who's struggling with reading because they have inaccurate eye movements, you want to create the right scenarios where their brain can learn how to more accurately do the things it needs to do to make that eye movement more accurate, whether it's that judgment of where it goes, how the eyes work together, or the motor response to that too. And that's what it's all about. But that's why people argue about it, because of definitions for those things too. Oh, here's a fun one. On Wikipedia, vision therapy is kind of like pseudoscientific and like quackery. So it's, yeah, right? So thank you, thank you. Now, if you want to know something kind of, yeah.
How long has it been locked for?
Oh, you know what? There's like an army of angry people behind this that if you go to try to change it, it like, I don't know if anyone's ever looked at the wiki thing, because I'm like, yes, some vision therapy isn't done well. Absolutely. It's the same with every profession. There's aspects of it that are way outside of what should be considered. But yeah, the wiki one's a funny one. So my way of combating this, just as like a personal humor anecdote for when I sometimes get in a little bit of a debate with another professional for that, is I just went, all right, well, you know what? When we treat this person, so I actually offered to one of these professionals, I actually said, I'll make you a bet, all right? If I'm right and treatment's successful, or sorry, if I'm wrong and treatment isn't successful, I will pay all the costs of treatment. Patient won't be out of pocket anything. It's all on me. I'm like, however, if you're wrong and treatment is successful, I expect you to pay the bill. So how certain are you of your opinion? I was like, silence. So I think now with where I am, I know I could have done that a lot more tactfully, but that was like a little bit younger me, maybe not quite as skilled in those ways. So there's definitely some stuff in there. However, a lot of places like Johns Hopkins, you know, the visual treatment's a critical piece of their care. Anyways, here's some more stuff. We don't need to run through all of it. It's just a lot of text on the screen. But cut through the noise. It's all about mechanisms. Understand symptoms and the problems that go along with them. But speaking of problems, how to spot one. Because this is what matters for you guys, your families, and your patients. So we want to know, could vision be involved? Well, is somebody not improving with other treatment as expected? So the physios that I work with, if somebody's doing vestibular rehab and they're not improving as expected, well, guess what? We want to check and see if depth perception's part of it. Same with headache and migraine stuff. The wonderful little pattern glare test. You know, if they look at that and that bothers them, then we know vision's part of it, okay? And it can be super, super prevalent. Reading and learning, for those of you with kids, if they're skipping lines, losing their place, having trouble recognizing words, they have messy writing or difficulty focusing, you want to make sure that you get how their vision's functioning evaluated. And the other telltale one that I don't have up on there is, does the child underperform in reading and writing versus how they do verbally? You know, so do we have a discrepancy between how this system works and how it works when it comes in and out this way? And that's a big one that's really, really important to me, especially because it changes the complete trajectory of people's self-esteem, of what they want to do after school, how they think about themselves relative to others around them, and how willing they are to engage in that. I had a young girl in grade 12, and we put something like that on her, and it was actually even different, though. And she actually burst into tears in about 10 seconds. And she said, "Mom, this is what I've been trying to tell people for 12 years. She's like, this stopped the words from moving around on the page on me. And this kid had passed an eye exam every single year. So the message there is if a kid is struggling, it is absolutely something that you want to get checked out. And then for some of you in the room and for your parents, cataract surgery stuff. This is another place where things can often get messed up too. And what I mean by this, and the simplest thing you can take away from this, if you know somebody going for cataract surgery, get them to elect for both eyes made clear for the distance. That is how our human visual system has evolved, is to have two eyes in the same focal distance and plane. Now sometimes people will do surgeries or even contact lenses to give one eye close and one eye far. All right? That has actually been shown to disrupt depth perception and give inaccurate motion processing. All right? We have enough bad drivers in Victoria. Okay? Everyone doing 80 on the highway, policing the speed limit in the left-hand lane. We don't need more. But it also increases people's risk of falls. And a lot of my older patients, they've just been told, no, sorry, your difficulty with reading, your fatigue, your feeling of cognitive impairment are just because you're getting older. And nobody's picked up the fact that their brain is really fighting trying to use the eyes together. Imagine if you spent all day with those prism goggles on that are kind of floating around here. You know, how do you think you'd be doing cognitively? Not well. The multifocal one, though, too. Some people do okay-ish with it. However, again, our brain has not evolved to have multiple depths in focus at the same time on the retina. So it is always, always worse for performance that way. One other new one that's not in the slide deck for your kids, and this will probably get me into some arguments with some colleagues, but there are glasses and other things out there right now meant to help stop your kids from becoming nearsighted. But what our research is showing is that some of the mechanisms that they use and some of the patented approaches for that actually disrupt their reading and focusing abilities. And then when you actually instead prescribe it in a way that, yes, it's not the patented lens from the company that's invested billions in it, but it actually makes them read better and faster and work better for that too. So do please be aware of that with your own children as well, because there is a big push coming from sort of our profession in terms of helping to stop kids from being nearsighted, which is a good and noble cause, but some of those solutions actually end up impairing reading and focus abilities, you know, and then kids often end up being medicated for those things separately when we're actually doing something that's impairing it in the first place. Glasses, all right? Now, lots of you in here wear glasses. These are the things you want to be aware of. Most of your glasses are prescribed just for clarity, all right? Now, I drive lens reps absolutely nuts because of my engineering background, especially because some of the marketing claims, they're like, well, this lens does this and this. And I'm like, you know that's optically impossible, right? And they just look at me like, eat your free lunch. But a lot of glasses that are prescribed just for clarity, they can actually inadvertently mess with your depth perception. All right, again, many of you noted in the beginning that you've had the experience of wearing glasses where you're like, oh, the world does not feel right in these. Okay, and sometimes it's more subtle. Sometimes you have glasses, and a good friend of mine, a wonderful entrepreneur, she actually said, she's like, this is the first time I've had glasses that actually just feel good and natural, and I can wear them all the time and I'm less fatigued. Because a lot of you will have glasses that you don't know why, but you just kind of want to take them off or don't like wearing them. And it's often because it ends up impacting how your eyes work together, but at a subtle level where you're not like, oh, I can feel double vision, I can feel them crossing, but you just feel more comfortable not looking through them. Progressive lenses. Okay? One of the cruelest things my profession has done is convince people that progressive lenses are amazing for everything. Okay? That's kind of like me saying, here's your one shoe that is absolutely amazing for everything in your life. You can go to weddings in it, you can run marathons in it, you can climb rocks in it, you can go fishing in it, you can scuba dive with it, etc. Could you imagine what that shoe would be like? All right? Now with progressive lenses, one of the issues is that if you go to use your progressive on your computer, all right, it's a great way to put your physio or chiro's kid through school, because you're going to be sitting there shortening your neck the entire time and often looking through a point that causes more strain. Do progressives have their place? Absolutely. They can be incredible. Another downside with progressives, though, is the way that most companies make them and the way that they're prescribed, they contain elements that change your depth perception. So those awful prism goggles that messed up stuff, a lot of progressive lenses contain prism like those do without anybody really knowing or caring. And in optometry school, we were taught just to overlook it. They're like, oh yeah, that's just the way progressives were. I mean, tell that to my patient who kept falling off of her horse because she thought the world was actually like on an angle that it wasn't, so her balance was always disrupted. So that's a big thing about progressive lenses as well. And it's also one of the reasons why so many people hate them, because they've put them on and they feel terrible. But if you design them not to be that way, it doesn't matter as much. Now, a lot of people are walking around and they don't realize their glasses are part of their problem because their glasses may help them with clarity so much. So, it's like, yeah, when your glasses are off, you can't see anything. So, life is better with them on, but depth is skewed or the eyes don't work as well together, and we sometimes chalk it up to other things. But when done properly, and my mission in life is to change optometry so that when done properly, every glasses prescription accounts for spatial effects, depth perception, and visual vestibular integration. So how that lens affects how the eyes and inner ear work together. And if you want to hear the really nerdy explanation of how that happens, well, many of you with glasses, if you kind of take them on or off or hold them in front of you, you'll see that your prescription changes the size of the room that you see there, right? So it changes your perception of size. But that also changes how much you see the room move when you move your head, which then impacts how your eyes and inner ear work together. It's the same logic by which you watch Dan in that video basically do this, and then we put a lens in there that he could move his head and the world stays more stable, which then ends up impacting his balance. Okay? Actually, I wonder about this one. Fun thing. Front row. Anybody, or even second row, anybody pick a target on the screen, look at it, and just shake your head a little bit side to side like you're saying no. And I'm looking for somebody who has like clear vision otherwise or contact lenses in, etc. And does that make you feel dizzy or disoriented, or does it move around? Where?
It does for me, but I'm wearing glasses.
You're wearing glasses? Oh, darn it. Might not be you. Yours moves? Side to side. Do you wear glasses or contacts? When was your last eye exam? Okay, that might be too big of a can to unpack right now. Anybody else who's like knows they have half decent distance vision or is wearing contacts, get it moving around?
I'm okay here. I don't have contacts on.
Okay, do you wear glasses normally?
Only when I'm driving now.
Okay, shoot, I probably can't show you either. All right, we'll figure out something a little bit later on. I might be able to. But there are ways with lenses where you can actually change it so that that person's head movement, all of a sudden you've changed the ratio in a good way, and then their vision is stable when they move their head. So as far as glasses, yeah, so they have the potential to improve it or make it worse. And this also matters for a lot of people with fatigue and stuff. So when we talk about testing for these things, advocating for yourselves and for your patients, testing goes beyond just clarity to look at eye tracking, binocular function, visual vestibular integration, and more. And for us, for example, we do routine eye health testing, like the puff of air, the flash of light, the scan on a separate day, because trying to get an accurate prescription after someone's been puffed and flashed and sometimes drops is hard. Most of you probably hate that test. We're like, is this more clear? And you're like, I can't really tell. What do you mean? And you get all nervous because you're going to get the wrong prescription because you answered the question wrong. And then you're all also doctors, so you're highly aware of your own interaction in the exam and everything too, and then you just overthink the heck out of it. And it's funny, there are ways to actually account for that. For example, if when you do the exam you blur up the eye that's not being tested, then your focusing mechanism also relaxes. And if you cue the patient, and this is often the sign you're in good hands, if you cue the person, is this actually more clear, or is it just smaller and darker or more straining? Because what you pay attention to will also change your answers. Because sometimes you'll be like, oh yeah, that's more clear, but it actually winds up being way more straining and you end up very overprescribed, like actually a lot of my staff were when they came to me from other places. Treating these visual conditions can involve glasses prescriptions and sometimes what's called vision therapy to recalibrate how our vision is working and how accurately that works. Now, for a lot of these patients at the same time, what's important to know is that vestibular and concussion treatments also contain a lot of visual components. So a lot of the time, when we treat these things, we'll just kind of, here's the glasses that stabilize things, do your other jam. But it also means that the visual issues can get in the way of treatment also. And we're trying to work to create more collaboration in these areas. But the big thing from the naturopathy side of stuff is a lot of these things are multifactorial. There's, again, more things going on. Headaches and migraines are almost the perfect example. Most of you with migraines, it's not really just one thing. It's kind of like, it's how we talk about it is it's like you have a cup, all right? And different things will fill the cup. Lack of sleep, emotional stress, red wine. Neck issues, vision issues, whatever. And when your migraine erupts is basically when your cup's full. And so, the goal is to reduce the amount of things that are filling the cup. But for you, for your own life and family, because this part's important and we want to leave this then open for some questions for us. But for your own life and family, basically kids, reading, attention, hand-eye coordination, and if your kid wears glasses, you do want to consider getting the functional side of their vision looked at. Like, honestly, in the ideal world, this stuff just happens for all kids anyways. For you, fatigue at work, screen sensitivity, reading enjoyment, and more. Myself, it was funny, it was about a month ago, I was getting home from work and I'm like, I'm just really tired these days. I got a 2-year-old and a 4-year-old at home, so I'm like, all right, is it just that? And I'm like, I'm avoiding doing my charting at night, I'm avoiding replying to emails, I'm not reading for pleasure of that. And I'm like, all right, dummy, check your own eyes. And I did, I changed my prescription, and then all of a sudden I'm like, back to having lots of energy at the end of the day too, all right? Proper glasses for the task, like shoes. For you, that matters as well. If you're a big hiker, wearing progressives when you're hiking is terrible for your depth perception, like trail running. However, wearing progressives in your office can be amazing because you need to see your person across the room and your stuff up close. But if you're going to sit and do all your charting for hours, or you have to do the back end of your work, or you're going to read, again, sometimes something designed specifically for that can work a lot better. For your parents, keep in mind the stuff about cataract surgery. Visual issues and depth perception problems are super common in seniors. They cause lots of falls, and they're actually very preventable. But the prevalence is really, really high with that. So I can't impress it on you enough. Make sure cataract surgery is done for both eyes at distance. And if they're wearing glasses too, make sure that their depth perception and balance aren't being negatively impacted by their glasses. So remember from today, vision is about a lot more than clarity. If you have a kiddo struggling with reading, check this first. Regular eye exams miss this stuff. Wherever you are in BC, you want to get connected with somebody who looks at how vision functions. Okay? And there's a number of us around who really care about these things. But different people will also take different approaches. So in your hometown, when you find somebody who does, go visit them at their office. It's like so many other professions. Get a feel for who they are, how they practice, their model of how things work, et cetera, too. Get to know them. Here's my contact. I will forward to your association the little pattern glare test, all right, so that you will get that. But, also feel free, shoot me an email. I realize I might, regret that later. But, the other thing, too, when you open up the doors with somebody in your own town or your own area, is that one of the things, for example, we offer with all of our referring professionals too is it's like, hey, if you think vision's a problem for somebody, cool, reach out to me and I'll tell you whether it's worth an appointment or not. Probably like most of you don't really like seeing patients that you can't help, right? If you get the person in there who's really not a good candidate for your care, you're kind of like, oh man, waste of time, money for them and, for you too. So that piece is really important. But that is my contact info. We've got a TEDx talk online as well on YouTube. It can be accessed through our website. We've got a book. If you're in Victoria, feel free. You can stop by the office and grab a paper copy, or you can get a digital version of it online. And then we will have some more materials coming out shortly as well. Now, I do want to open up the time for questions. And just with that one note too, at the very end of things, what would really mean a lot to me, if you learned something useful today, visit our amazing camera guy, Jack, because he's catching a couple short snippets of those things to be able to help us spread awareness of how these visual issues impact people in their lives. So with that, questions? I saw you first there, sir.
Any thoughts on PRK or LASIK?
Yeah. Oh, PRK or LASIK can be awesome in the right situations. So PRK or LASIK, are most of you familiar? You've heard the terms at least? Do all of you know what it does, how it works? Yeah. Okay. Because what's really funny is sometimes people are like, yeah, they just fixed my eye with a laser. I don't know what it is about lasers, but you involve lasers in anything and people are they think it's like magic and it just fixes things. PRK and LASIK basically reshape the cornea or the front of your eye to correct for your refractive error or the prescription that you need to see clearly. Okay? So it's basically like cutting or welding a contact lens into or onto your eye. All right? It's like a permanent contact lens. So LASIK and PRK can be great with the right expectations and for the right people. You've got to do a lot of stuff to manage and make sure someone's not going to get worse dry eye because of it. You don't want to give somebody the expectations that they're not going to need reading glasses afterwards for things, because they will at some point, because again, it's just like they've taken the distance prescription and put it onto the eye. So it can be great. It is so much better than it used to be. There used to be so many problems from an old procedure called radial keratotomy. But yeah, LASIK and PRK can be really good. What I'd say, again, same kind of thing. Get to know the people in your area. Chat with them about it. Don't let them try to do one eye close and one eye far. Now again, I'm not so black and white that I think there's no place for that. I have a stage actor who we've actually set up with contacts to do one eye close and one eye far for while he's on stage and he needs to see close and far at the same time. But we take him out of that as soon as he's driving, as soon as he's reading, as soon as, for the rest of his life. So there's solutions for this situation. Around LASIK and PRK too, sometimes just be cautious of any of the super new technologies that really highly promise stuff, because about every 5 years they figure out there's actually more problems than good stuff with it, and then they stop doing it. So yeah, hopefully, is that helpful? Yeah, good. But yeah, no, it can be a really good procedure. Sorry, there was a question up front. Second, yeah.
I know someone who can basically read a paragraph at once.
Yeah.
How do you explain that? Is it just that they're really good at tracking?
So that's actually a really cool thing to talk about. So did everyone hear? She said she knows somebody who can read a paragraph basically at once. Okay. So I want you to picture reading a little bit like running. Okay. Now, given your environment and the task, you're going to run differently. So there are different styles of reading that are applicable for different things. And some people, in the ideal world, you have the flexibility to change how you're doing it. Okay? So for example, if you're reading something where you need to get the gist of it, being able to skim read something can be fantastic. You're like, yeah, I got the gist of it. But I bet there's a whole bunch of you in here who are skim readers, get the gist of things easily, but then kind of struggle when it actually comes to like having to recall fine details from what you read. Okay? And I know that because I had the same issue. That was one of the reasons I liked engineering. Teach me how to solve the problem and I can apply the concept over and over and over instead of putting me in a history course or Biochem 300 where I've just got to recall details from the paragraphs that I read. So ultimately there's different modalities of reading, like running. You're running in a big open area, you're going to be taking big strides running at a certain pace, and then all of a sudden it changes to a trail and you need to actually start changing what you're doing. So oftentimes what I'd say to that is a lot of people, most people who do read that way, will have to go to a more detailed approach when it's for fine content, like reading the exact terms of a contract. There might be some people who have such a strong visual memory that they can actually literally pull up what the page looked like, but then they're rereading it afterwards in order to get the fine detail. Does that make sense? Yeah. Yeah. And there are some people with visual memories that are that strong, and visual memories will change person to person, and there is work you can do sometimes to improve it. One thing I left out of there with kids, so it's kind of funny. With kids, sometimes you can put a kid through like 3 hours of testing to figure out how their visual memory is, or you can ask them, how's your spelling? Okay, because spelling is the applied concept of visual memory, right? Hopefully you don't spell phonetically, it doesn't work. And what do you say when a word's spelled wrong? Like seriously, what do you say to yourself? How do you know it's spelled wrong? It looks wrong, right? It's not because sometimes kids will spell things and you're like, well, technically that sounds right, but it looks wrong. It's spelled wrong. So yeah, but visual memories can vary for sure between people. Sorry, there's a question back there I wanted to get to, and then. Sweet, let's.
So you mentioned that progressives are not always appropriate with typing.
Yeah.
But what about someone who's using progressives in their post-concussion rehabs and they're using them for their activity all
Yeah.
the time? So how is that different?
So what I'd say is this, is that the very nature of a progressive so what she was talking about was progressives not being good for things like hiking, but then, using them in concussion rehab. And the answer that I'd have for that is it entirely depends on how thoughtfully the lens has been prescribed, because there actually are some patients in rehabilitation efforts that if they aren't wearing a progressive or bifocal, their rehab will not go the way that it should go because their eyes will cross in ways that they shouldn't up close, and the progressive or bifocal keeps their eyes from crossing. However, from a theory standpoint, anytime you're doing a sport or activity, a progressive lens will impair your function in the sport or activity simply because the reading part in the bottom does warp space a little bit too. So it's not always, like I used to be of the mindset back when of like, take people out of progressives always, in concussion rehab. And quite frankly, if the progressive is prescribed in a thoughtless way or in a very typical just clarity way, then that's usually a good rule of thumb. But if it's prescribed in a much more helpful manner by somebody who looks at those things, then it can actually be assistive. Yeah.
I'm just curious about the treatment corrective strategies in the context of inflammatory conditions like allergies.
Yeah.
Just like you talk about LASIK and your type on the cornea, and just the edema associated with the allergies and that impact on fraction and even irregularities, astigmatism.
Yeah.
I mean, these people will spend maybe 3 months, maybe 6 months of the year in that state.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, they'll notice these visual.
Yeah. So did everybody hear that? We were talking about the impact of inflammation and allergies on kind of like refractive error, like corneal curvature and astigmatism and things like that. Yeah. What's interesting about that, and I can't, what I'd have to say is I'd have to get some more information to understand that piece better. Clinically speaking, from what I watch in my patient population, I don't necessarily see a huge change in refractive errors seasonally that I've noticed, but I also can't say that I've ever analyzed my data based on that either. And immediately I'm like, oh, that would actually be really cool. So to answer you appropriately, I'd have to actually go look up a lot more stuff. So I'm sorry I can't, but I also don't want to just make things up and give you answers. But no, in terms of general inflammatory stuff, like anything else, when you are treating things, it's like, yeah, get at the systemic stuff first. But that's actually a good question about LASIK and other things. General inflammation can make people's dry eye a lot worse. Actually, the other thing that general inflammation can play into a lot, as well as a condition called iritis, which is actually inflammation of the ciliary body and other parts inside the eye, which can impact people's vision and light sensitivity and things like that a lot too. So people with like rheumatoid arthritis and other things are more likely to develop this, and general inflammatory conditions. And if we have patients with that, sometimes the first question is, do you have general inflammatory conditions for that too? And obviously treating it systemically. Ocularly, we often have to treat that with a steroid as well. If the inflammation is bad enough and out of control, because it becomes cyclical. But the inflammation also matters for things like contact lens wear and other dry eye stuff, because more inflammation will make dry eye worse as well. So that's, yeah. But as far as the cornea goes, I'm not sure about inflammation in relation to the cornea. Because our cornea is an odd thing. We don't have normal blood supply. There's no blood supply to the cornea. Generally, when the cornea changes shape or curvature due to any sort of inflammation, it's actually because the little pumps, the little like proton pumps in the cornea actually aren't pumping out fluid and whatever else properly. So the cornea actually gets edema because of that. And it can come from damage, but yeah. So, I don't know, something to dig into. Sorry, question here. I realize I've like kind of ignored this side of the room, so we're gonna.
Just 2 quick questions. One, is there a list of other practitioners like you in BC
Yeah.
that you have and that you could share? Or
Yeah. There's an association called Vision Therapy Canada. Most people in Canada are kind of registered with that association. But again, I would highly encourage you to get to know people before recommending them as well, because you'll find a huge variability in practice styles.
And second quick question, when it comes to kids that you're diagnosing or asking them to read, is it different with the screen reading versus book or paper reading?
Good question. Screens often have higher contrast and a certain flicker frequency, so people are often more sensitive to screens. However, a lot of people find reading on certain screens easier when it's on a phone because it's like less eye movement. It's not as wide. They're not having to move their eyes as far or as much. So you get lots of people where they're like, well, no, I can read fine on my phone. I just, because it's more limited, and or they just blow up the text size. There's the funny one. It's the people who want to avoid reading glasses. They're like, I just blow up the text size on my phone. And I'm like, what do you think makes you look older? Like wearing reading glasses or like, phone text size that can be read by SpaceX. The screens will usually provoke more headache and migraine and trouble concentrating, for sure. So that is why a lot of people sometimes, and probably a lot of you are like, I hate charting on the screen, I'll only do it on paper. And it's usually because you have a visual sensitivity that just hasn't been addressed.
Can you make a comment on hard lenses that kids wear at night?
Oh, ortho-K?
Yeah, it's okay.
All right, I'm going to start another argument. So what ortho-K is these are hard contact lenses that you wear at night that they push on your cornea to reshape your cornea. Okay, so the cornea is the clear front of your eye, no vasculature in there, and the hard contacts push on that so that it reshapes it so that you can see clearly. Okay, what do you think slowly happens as the hard contact comes off during the day? The eye slowly changes. So there's a couple issues that you see with Ortho-K. Ortho-K can be great, but one of the problems is that people think it's actually fixing the problem. They're like, oh, well, now my natural eye has great vision during the day. And it's like, well, no, it's just been like, you know, it's like, oh, we've kept your feet at size 4, ballerina. And it's like, well, no, you put the feet in casts, and now they're all, you know, messed up. And so Ortho-K pushes on the cornea to do that. And then through the day, the prescription will change a bit. Now, I don't have an Ortho-K practice for that reason, because from a like biomechanical and engineering perspective, any material you keep pushing on will eventually not do so well. Okay? It's why we get wrinkles. It's why, like everything else, like any material, talk to any materials engineer. It's the same with your kids and bendy glasses. You know, bendy glasses can be great, but make sure that part's replaceable, because anything only has a certain number of bends. Okay, and then the material loses its structural components. So with Ortho-K though, one of the big problems with kids is their vision fluctuates during the day, and then their brain's getting different visual perception than it did earlier in the day, and it's not consistent. And so I watch a lot of those kids struggle in school with reading and focus, and they might be really bright, so they might not look like they struggle that much, but they definitely underperform. So yeah, I personally, my opinion on that is steering clear of Ortho-K.
So do you prefer glasses over a contact lens?
Not necessarily. Contact lenses can be amazing, especially with high prescriptions, sports, all sorts of stuff. I'd say for everything, it's a tool in the toolbox. There's a time and a place for it. You know, contact lenses can be incredible, especially for people with really high prescriptions, because the contact lens can stop the warping of depth and space. With a really high prescription, if it's out, and some of you will know this, if your glasses are out even like a few millimeters one way or the other, your world feels terrible, and that's simply the optics. So in a lot of cases, we'll use contact lenses to negate for that with people too. So yeah, so it's never really like a one or the other. It's just, again, it's situation dependent. What's going to work best? What's going to work best for what we need?
Is it normal to have eye dominance?
Yes, almost always. And if all of you want to see which one of your eyes is dominant, you can make a tiny little triangle in your hands, sight something up here, and then close one eye and the other eye, and you can check. This is something we have to do with marksmen a lot. Okay, so there's a lot of people who they can fire a rifle and can't fire a handgun to save their life. Okay, now this topic is usually of a lot more interest south of the border, so we're not. That's why we don't really go into it up here. But you know, when I was working down in Florida, it's like I mentioned that, and everyone's like, "What? Tell me more." So there's interesting eye dominant stuff. I saw a question over here too.
You talked about the risks of preventing myopia with glasses. Can you talk more about how the strategies of preventing or treating myopia from
Yeah. So there's let's talk a little bit about myopia or nearsightedness, okay? And a couple interesting things for you guys to know, and there is arguments in the literature and profession about this, which is good to know too. So myopia is becoming nearsighted. Technically what happens is your eye changes its size and it shifts your focal point from distance to closer to you. If you take a population of people who doesn't read, doesn't use screens, doesn't do a lot of up-close work, not very many of them become myopic. Okay? Now there are genetic predisposition factors to myopia as well, but there's massive environmental factors to it, massive. And so if you think about it, if you go, okay, eyes, we're going to strain and we're going to look at something up close. If I go to the gym and I lift weights, my body adapts to it. For most people, if you sit and strain your eyes looking at up close, your body will adapt to it. It grows your eyes by fractions of a millimeter to bring your focal point closer to you. If you put a group of people on a submarine for 6 months, almost all of them will become slightly nearsighted because everything they're looking at is closer. Our bodies are amazing. So the mechanisms of going, okay, hey, how do we reduce nearsightedness? I work a lot with the Orthodox Jewish population in New York, and they're like statistically the most nearsighted population there is. Now, part of that might have to do with how much they read, like a lot. Okay, a lot of social status is based on academic performance, right? Guys, imagine if you were married based on your grades. But seriously, and it's amazing and it's admirable, but it's a huge visual demand. And where this plays into is that, so the theory being, if you can reduce the strain on the visual system, then we can prevent the adaptation. And there's multiple ways to reduce the strain. A, send someone to go live in a forest, okay? But that's not very realistic. So one of the ways that you can reduce the strain is by figuring out what that person's visual system needs to not strain so much up close. The problems with some of the literature on this is that some of the ways of doing this were employed kind of wrong. They go, okay, we're going to see if bifocals reduce the strain. So we're going to take a big group of people and we're all going to give them random bifocals and see if it helps. But none of them actually went, okay, well, what does that person actually need for their system? It's like if you guys actually look at someone's hormone levels and thyroid and whatever, and then you actually figure out what that person needs, as opposed to just taking a group of people and all giving them the same thing. So then they're like, oh, that doesn't work. But they didn't really check it that well. Next up is what's called atropine. Atropine is a drop that actually penalizes the focal system in the eye. And if you give somebody enough of it, they can't shift the focus of their eye. So the goal there, originally, and they'll kind of say it's not, but it does impact the focusing mechanism of the eye where the strain is happening. Now there's some other receptors and things that it plays into as well, but I'm not a huge fan of the pharmacological intervention for it because of the side effects on reading performance and attention. Because it actually limits those as well. So in my brain, what makes the most sense is to go, okay, based on how your eyes work, what needs to happen to create the least amount of strain when you are reading and the most efficient and effective eye movement and least amount of strain on the system, prescribe the person that, and you generally watch myopia either stop, significantly slow down, or not occur. And we've got amazing data on thousands and thousands of kids in New York that I just have to pay somebody to go back through, but that is what we've watched clinically. So what the problem is, though, is a lot of companies jumping on that bandwagon, they've got so here's one, and let's see if any of you can spot the flawed logic in this. So one company has a lens where the middle is clear, and then outside the middle are all these little dots that basically give extra strength for looking up close and create peripheral blur, all right? So there's a couple problems with this. One, how many of you leave your eyes looking dead straight all day long? I can't even do it. All right, so kids are looking off the center of this thing. It's actually having some bifocal effect, but it messes with their reading. That's one of the ones. There's other contact lenses for it. Ortho-K can sometimes help slow myopia control, but half the time it's because they're walking around with half of their myopia for half of the day anyways, because it's actually fluctuated during the day. And it's interesting sometimes when you ask Ortho-K docs, how often do you check the kid's refractive error at the end of the day as well to see how much it's shifted during the day, and they almost never do it. And when you talk to the companies, they don't promote it. But so usually the best way is sometimes a combination of either a multifocal lens that reduces the strain at near for it, and or the right amount of prism or other components in the glasses that, again, make the visual system not have to fight and strain up close so you don't trigger the adaptive response. That's the TLDR.
Thank you.
Okay, thanks. I see one over there. Yeah, so MySight lenses would be another one where they're looking at creating more peripheral blur. MySight lenses, not me personally, again, and I'm not as much of a fan of them simply because I know they impair depth perception, and I know they do impair, and because I've watched it again, and so this isn't I can be okay, I've got this double-blind placebo-controlled study that shows this, but so the disclaimer is I've watched this clinically and measured it myself. But the MySight lenses, yes, they can slow myopia, but sometimes at the negative impact of how well the performance is for reading and other things like that, or in sports. You'd find reduced depth perception performance in sports as well, because it actually is creating an artificial visual environment that is not, again, how we're meant to process depth. So my go-to and what I work with usually there is I'll often use contacts for a lot of people, but then when they're actually going to sit and play video games for a long time or read or whatever it is, they'll actually have simple glasses they wear for that takes away the focal strain from that activity, and then we don't see the progression of the myopia the same way. But again, there is a place for MySight too, because there's also times when that's actually the best option. All of you guys are practitioners for stuff. somebody's certain situation and their values to them as a patient also play a role in how you treat things. So it's not really always just about, I'm sort of their consultant and I'll offer my opinion and my experience and those things, but then we also take into account how does it work with the person's values and what they want out of stuff and how they want to guide their own care within that also. If that makes sense to you? Yes. Cool. So sometimes just the way I'm wired, my opinions can seem really strong about stuff. However, yeah, do please note that nothing is so black and white that way either. Sweet. Yes.
If somebody screams abnormal on the pattern glare, then is there anything in particular we're asking for if we're phoning around?
Surgical removal of the eyes. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, so when you're phoning around, you want to find somebody who can do basically like a functional vision evaluation. It's usually a doctor who specializes in vision therapy, and the big one you want to ask them is, do they prescribe lens prescriptions to improve function? Because some people will do vision therapy as eye exercises, but won't actually use the glasses or lenses properly as part of that. Yeah. Yes.
How does color deficiency or color blindness impact what you're discussing?
Color blindness doesn't impact it too much, to be honest. Usually all it means is you want to take a friend shopping with you and have your clothes sorted in particular ways at home so you know. And then there's certain jobs you can't do. But yeah, color blindness doesn't really impact this stuff too much. You can still have amazing depth perception, how the eyes work together, and you can also have all those problems along with or without color blindness. Yeah, cool. Awesome. It looks like we actually worked through that. Thank you guys for being fun.